Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview in Lyons Hall, Canisius College, Buffalo, New York. It is the 8th of May, 2008, approximately 1 p.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Okay, Daniel Starr, P. Starr. Date of birth, September 9th, 1934, Kenmore, New York.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to going into the service?
2 years of college, which is high school, obviously.
Where'd you go to high school?
Holy Angels, I started on the west side, and that collapsed, and then Fallon.
Okay.
Became Fallon, and I graduated from there, and then 2 years at Canisius.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, we asked to be drafted. In other words, we knew we would probably be drafted. We, when I say the bunch of guys I was sitting around with in the saloon that was our base for launching, and we decided to go down to the draft board and tell them to take us because it seemed like a good time to go.
Mm-hmm. Why didn't you, I noticed, why didn't you wait until you finished your 4 years instead of?
Well,
I just,
well, one of the reasons was the Korean War period was still going on, and I think several of us who went in together, we were like a group that hung around, were motivated or inspired by the fact that, or heard that the GI Bill was going to go out in January of '55. So this was early '54. We wanted to make sure we got the GI Bill.
mm-hmm.
And even though employment was generally good, if I remember right, in most of the 50s, as I researched that, it seemed like in the summer of '54, some of us were saying, oh, well, jobs aren't so great this year. Let's go and get the GI Bill and, do it.
Okay.
So that's what we did, yeah. We went down and asked the draft board, and they moved them up. I don't know if they did that much over the years, but they did it then.
Mm-hmm. So when did you go into service?
In summer of '54, August of '54.
Okay, and where did you go for basic training?
Fort Knox, Kentucky, obviously.
How long was your basic training for?
It was an 8-week regular one, and then a second 8-week of advanced training.
Okay, did you go for armor training?
No, it was, well, I suppose the basic training was, no, it wasn't armor, it was more infantry. I mean,
Okay.
I don't remember even being in a tank until I was visitor over in Korea or so, but it was basic training is just, I would call it infantry training.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they give you, well, so all of your training was basically infantry, you didn't get
Well,
any?
in the second, no, it was
okay.
office, clerical, I mean, it was a
okay.
typist type of thing, yeah. Mhm. Gave up the M1 for an old Underwood typewriter, carried that around.
How long was the clerical training?
That was 8 weeks also, yeah.
Okay. Now, did any of the guys that you went in with, were you all together, or did you all get separated?
Yeah, when we went in, there were probably 8 or 9 of us who were sitting around the Kenmore Tavern. I don't know if you remember that. You're from probably South Buffalo, so you would have a similar place like Mishler's, but they had a great big thing out there in the summer. You sat out there, and we were, I think there must have been 6 or 7 from there, and then a lot more from Buffalo, but I don't know what term I use. I can think of about 5 really good friends and then some other ones, and we went down, we all went to basic training together. And then for the second, phase of basic training, some of us went to clerical, some went to signal school, some went to, different kinds of things. So we did break up a little then, but I did stay with a couple of my friends right on through, that period and overseas.
Okay, after
Kind of
your
an alphabetical
clerical
thing.
schooling.
God, I got a good story to tell you on this if you want it, but I mean, we had, let's say there's 200 in your basic company at the end of the school. So there, of the 200, they said, well, of your 200, 170 are going to Korea, maybe 18 or 20 to Germany, 2 to Panama, 4 to Hawaii, 4 to Austria. So I drew an Austrian one. I thought, oh boy, this is nice, Austria. But then we had a guy, Corporal Burks, who I think he was not a regular CAF stat, but he was just coming back in the service too. But since he was a corporal, he drew rank, and he looked at me, he said, Starr, you're going to Korea. I'm going to Austria. So what was I going to do? I couldn't very well fight or argue or anything, and so on. So I missed out, but that was all right in the final analysis. Yeah. Got to Austria later. Life, yeah.
So
Anyway, so that after that, yeah, so then we had leave at Christmas, and came back, and then we shipped out to, we probably went back to Fort Knox, yeah, and then we took a plane, believe it or not, instead of just trains across the country, which was a venue in itself, of old planes, out to Fort Lewis, Washington, and spent a couple weeks out there. And then after that, then shipped out on the ship. Yeah, Fort Lewis was interesting too, yeah.
Now, what did you do at Fort Lewis for the couple weeks?
Hung around and got inoculated several times. One time going through the line, I remember the medic saying, they gave us whatever the different shots they were, I suppose, cholera and tetanus and all, whatever, boom. And a group of us got the end of the line, and the guy said, come on, you got to go over and get these again. We said, well, we got them already. Well, you'll get them in this arm this time. Keep going. So we had double shots. I don't know if that affected us at all, but we got shots, and we performed KP duty, and we just kind of hung around, took a little time off to go. I remember one time going up to Mount Rainier. I don't know if you've ever been to Washington, but I just mentioned this, that it's always rainy and cloudy, it seems, out there. And geez, I was taking care of the furnaces or KP for almost the entire 2 weeks, but one day right near the end, the sun was shining, and you looked out behind Fort Lewis, and high above the clouds, it just stands out majestically as Mount Rainier. You wouldn't have known it was there, but it was like 60 miles and away, but it just stood out majestically. So then we boarded our ships out there and went out to sea, and the first night, I was one of the few who didn't get sick, but I always remember the very first night out in the Pacific Ocean. Everybody and their brother was heaving up all over the place, and so on in the ship. I mean, everybody was just seasick, but then I get used to it. So it was a 17-day trip over to Incheon. I always like to tell my students, because I taught a lot of military history for the 40 years, I was just like you did, I guess, Mike, didn't you?
Yes.
Some of that in World War II stuff. I always tell them I landed at Incheon. Although it was a couple of years after the big invasion of September, I said, and we went across, we went ashore in those landing barges, but we had ladders and there was nobody shooting at us and all that, but sometimes I'd embellish that and I'd tell them all that. And then we got into, I don't know, some kind of a repo depot at Incheon and got orders to go to different places. So we then were kind of broken up, and I went from Incheon, right next to Seoul, the capital, and we took the trucks, the deuce and a halves, and they took us up to a place called Moonsahni, Moonsan, and then Ni, the village, I guess, and that's where I spent almost 2 years until June or July of 1956. And Moonsahni was what they called the base camp for Panmunjom. So that was my job, to work in kind of a headquarters Quonset hut there in Moonsahni, and that was, I think, 8 miles, 32 miles north of Seoul, and about 8 miles from Panmunjom. Obviously, nobody was stationed in Panmunjom, but what would happen was that if there was going to be a meeting between the communist side and the UN side, it was basically the American side, the base camp support group is where they, this is where, we had some high brass there. That's where whoever was in charge at a given time. You usually had a what do you call them, a field grade officer, I guess, either a general or an admiral would be in charge, and then a couple of the other delegation, and they would go and meet with their counterpart at Panmunjom just to talk basically about violations of the DMZ, the militarized zone, and who was going through and who wasn't, and so on. They actually had also an advance camp almost at the DMZ, but that was composed of not so much Americans, but the neutral nations, the Czechs and Swedes. Let me see. The Czechs and Poles from the communist side, because they were part of the Iron Curtain at that time, and we had the Swiss and Swedes, so there were those there too. But our group at Unknick was simply to serve as a support group and just to be there, support with not weaponry so much, because there were the infantry divisions in the hills nearby, but we were more clerical support, motor pools, things like that, that helped out. And one of my friends had a good job. He was in charge of he was an NC or enlisted man too, but he was in charge of the officer club, so we had to keep him in booze, and so on, that kind of thing. But so there was a good job. But anyway, so that's what I did. I took care of the daily bulletin and served in that was one of the main jobs. A lot of guard duty, things like that. then on the side doing other.
Did you ever have to go up on the DMZ as a guard, or just on your?
No, I
your-
never, I did serve as a guard, but not right on the DMZ. There were other guys who did do that, but not myself, no. But,
Did you ever go up there for any of the meetings?
oh yeah, I did. In fact, just till recently, everybody's going in there. I said, geez, I was one of the few guys in America who ever put my foot in there. You know, you weren't supposed to, but you go right in the middle. Like, hey, get back, Starr, don't do that, you know, or something like that. They'll shoot you. Well, shoot, but I mean, they weren't necessarily friendly. But to answer your question, yeah, we did go up there, and they, you know, occasionally they would let you go up as guests. I wasn't actually an integral part of the meetings, but you could go up as an observer, get the special passes and special armbands and all that kind of thing, and go up and do that. Yeah, so. Yeah, that was part of it, And I can't think, the time went fast. I went over to Japan several times on R&R when I was there, and that was very nice. And I used to go back down to Seoul. On my own, once in a while, I would pick up, when we didn't have a chaplain up there, I would pick up a chaplain's jeep on Sunday, and we'd go up to right in the middle of Seoul at that time, which was really, as you probably remember, a third world nation. One of the few nice areas in it was like in a big blockaded or stockaded place, was a place where the Columban missionaries were. And there were other missionaries around there too, Protestant missionaries, but I'd go in there and you'd go in through this big kind of stockade and pick up one of these priests and take them around up to some of the sites, up to the 1st Marine Division. I remember taking them up there and where they'd say Mass and so on, that kind of thing, yeah. But it was interesting because I think, Mike, because it was as I say, the Seoul now supposed to be, you know, really probably one of the best products ever of American foreign policy, in the way that the whole country has advanced into, you know, modern first-class, you know, economy and all that kind of thing. But then it was just, well, I mean, they hadn't really done much. Sigmund Rhee was the dictator in charge, and they hadn't really recovered much from the war, and there were still lots of bomb craters around, and the buildings were all dilapidated and all that. So it was refreshing to see this spot where the Columban missionaries, you know, had their place and so on, yeah.
Did you have much contact with the Korean people?
Yeah, quite a bit. You go out and not just the women either, but you go out into the side and see them and talk to them, and maybe even help out once in a while in orphanages. I remember doing a little of that. And
you said there was a warrant officer that went out and helped?
Yeah. What the hell, Mr. Holman, that's right. He went to, I think he was probably a Presbyterian or Methodist, because those were big over there at the time, even though he was from here, but I mean, working with church people over there. And he'd go out and we'd take food and presents and things like that to the children or the, you know, the people in need.
How did the people react to you as
pretty good, yeah, pretty good. I think they liked Americans. I certainly didn't detect any hostility at all toward us. I think that no, I couldn't say you know, that either there or in Japan. There was a pretty warm feeling, yeah.
Did you ever eat much of the local food? Or?
I didn't. I hated that, looking at that, what they call the kimchi. You see these pots of it, and I like most food, but never. I ate a lot more local food when I was in Japan, but not much of it. No, I mean, it tasted. No.
The spices taste.
Huh? Yeah, exactly. And to this day, I mean, it's just one of those things in the back of your mind. I know, I used to see it look like sewer water. They were kind of mixing up in those things and so on. So not too much of that, yeah. And we used to have, you know, and then we had a lot of Koreans working for us too. We had what they call katusos, who were just laborers. And I wondered sometimes, you get a different perspective on this. And these were guys who worked there. They were called katusos. I think meant Koreans attached to the U.S. Army, and they had to do heavy bulk work and lift stuff. And they used to live nearby in a camp right near the American camp. And these guys would eat rice. I mean, literally 3 times a day, 7 days a week, with one exception, they'd have a meat soup once a week. And I used to think to myself, how can you gripe about the food when these guys are just eating this all the time? Well, like a lot of rice, I guess, in that.
Now, what was your food like? Was it just
pretty good
rations, or
yeah.
did you have?
No, it was basically pretty good food most of the time. Hot food that came in there. Once in a while, sea rations, but usually it was decent food. I mean, it was regular food, I would say. Yeah. So that was pretty good.
Now,
we did leave in tents. I mean, we did. Now today, I suppose it's all modern, but I mean, during like the monsoon season, it was very muddy and dirty, and then during the summer, it'd be very hot and all that. And we did live in tents. So that was semi-rustic. In the winter, you'd have to huddle around a little potbelly stove. And then in the summer, the rats would come and eat, if you had any food underneath your cot, they'd take that and carry that away, and that's how you get used to that kind of thing. But, I mean, again, it was not, wartime conditions, certainly, it was just kind of.
How many times did you go to Japan?
Well, I was always trying to work on a deal. I think it was 5 different times. I think you're supposed to go every 3 months. Well, no, 2 of those times were, I think, on the way over and on the way back, stopped. The ship stopped at Sasebo, which is a big naval base, on the way over, and then on the way back, we got some leave out of Yokohama. But I went over at least 3 or 4 other times on, what they call the R&R, rest and recuperation. And another time, one guy said, hey, I'll tell you another way how to get there. After a few months, you tell them you want to go on a religious retreat. So I went to a Jesuit retreat, so all these guys went to retreats. An awful lot of holy guys on the surface going over there. I remember coming back a couple days late, and the MP at the Kimpo airfield and so, what were you doing over that time? I said, I was at a retreat. He said, what the hell's a retreat? Well, that's a religious thing. Well, okay, so I guess they were glad to have me back and all. But I did, in Japan, of course, at that time, I mean, today I think a lot of people could almost equate the 2 economies, but at that time Japan had made such, and this was again the early 50s, so it was a little less than 10 years after World War II, but they had made such rapid advances, they really had.
I was going to ask you was there much
together.
damage evident from the war?
Not much. In a little area, I remember going one time of Tokyo where they had the fire bombs, there was some, but for the most part, not much. I mean, the trains were running great, and I don't remember an awful lot of cars, an awful lot of bikes and little cars that were beginning to come back. And at that time, a lot of the Japanese products were viewed as kind of cheesy, I remember, compared to today. But I mean, when they first started to make some of their stuff, that improved a lot after that. But the Japanese, they probably, of course, they might hide feelings too, but they certainly were friendly toward Americans. I mean, maybe that's because they knew that we were willing to spend money and all that, that sort of thing. But I mean, there were certainly first-rate restaurants, in Tokyo. I mean, it was really on the verge of becoming, as it would be, a world-class city. So, yeah, that was nice, and that was really a different duty in Japan. I mean, because then Korea was, as I said, kind of still third world and dirty and smelly and
Was there
stuff like that.
much black market activity in Korea?
Yeah, there was. We had a guy, in our tent or in one of our tents there. I mean, every payday he took money up from some guys, and he had ways of getting shipped in. The big things were, for some reason, cigarettes naturally, and I don't know, basic black market activity in Korea was a pretty big thing, but there were a lot of basic things. Soap, shoe polish, I remember those things, cigarettes. And for some reason, this guy, I remember him getting a crate of harmonicas. And he was taking those to Hong Kong, he said, or I don't know. This guy, it just boggled my mind the way this guy was dealing in things. Yeah, but there was a lot of petty, I'd call it, black market stuff too. If you had some extra bars of soap or extra something, you might do that. But there were guys who some anyway, who made a job out of it. I'd say, yeah.
Now you in the sheet you sent to us, you mentioned someone named Tennessee.
Oh, that was when I was in basic training. I mean, I think maybe Nancy or somebody was talking about some of the humorous incidents and so on. And yeah, we got down to basic training in Fort Knox. And of course, we're amazed. I mean, at that time, you really had to respect the sergeant. I mean, there was no way about it. Hey, this is the Army. Boom. So we're in the barracks probably a couple of weeks. And for some reason, a couple of the regular sergeants latched on to, and a couple of other guys. I don't know, maybe they thought, guys to get along with. So they said, come on, we're going out post to get a few beers. Okay, so we said, okay. So they got probably 6 or 7 of us, and with a couple of the regular full-time, I'd call them Army guys, a couple of staff sergeants, I guess. And we got into this one place, and it was naturally off limits, because I think all the bars right near the base were off limits for some reason or other. But we got in there, and I bought the first round, unfortunately. I'll never do that again. Because no sooner I bought the first round than the guy said, the MPs, boom! Guys make a mad dash out the back door. I crack a bottle over my hand, and I'm holding it because it's cut. And we get out in the back, and the MPs come, and they find us, a couple of us out there, and the sergeants too, rounding up. And then this one guy named Tennessee, and naturally he's from Tennessee, so they find him searching around. He's underneath the car. And the MPs say, what's that? Hey, what are you doing down there? He said, well, I'm fixing the car. He said, what do you mean you're fixing? He said, yeah, there's something wrong with it, I'm fixing it. And then they get down, they drag the guy out kind of from down there and say, where are the tools? Well, we don't have any tools, I'm just giving an assessment. And this was in his Tennessee voice and all that too. And it just struck us so funny, is how could the guy say he's down there fixing the car and he doesn't have any tools? It just always stuck in my mind as just one of those funny little incidents, Mike, you know, that kind of thing. So it was a little thing, but one of those memorable things that I remember, yeah.
Now, this was a time right after Truman integrated the Army. Was
Yeah.
your unit integrated? Or?
Yeah, in fact, I worked for a black sergeant, and Isaiah Fouché, and he was a graduate of North Carolina A&T, the same school that Jesse Jackson, I think, had gone to in the South, you know, one of those historic black schools and so on. And a nice guy, and no problem on that. So he was, now, it was a typical Army situation. It's almost a typical campus situation. The Army was integrated. We saw these guys. We were friends. We worked with them. I kind of worked for him. He was like a master sergeant, and I was, you know, at the desk in front of him there and so on. And so on. But the black guys all lived in a tent, you know, with other black guys. And when they went over to Japan, they always all went to Yokohama, and the white guys went to Tokyo, for example. So, you know, there was integration in the jobs and in the military, and there's certainly, I didn't see any animosity, even though we had Southern guys. I don't remember much hostility or at all. Maybe once in a while somebody would say, yeah, if that guy were back in the South, he wouldn't do that. But it seemed to function quite well, to tell you the truth. Even though, as I say, people kind of hang around their own kind and go separate ways, I think you'd say that, yeah.
Now, I have to ask you, because you didn't expand on it, you wrote something about a Sergeant Dum-Dum, is it?
Oh, geez, this was a classic case. I was kind of a ball breaker. This guy, this was in second training. And we used to get up about 5 in the morning to do our exercise, or PT. And so one morning, about 4 of us, we got in the columns of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, columns of 4. And so we have behind us at least 200, maybe more. So what we're going to do is, you know, you're jogging down, boom, boom, boom. And Sergeant Dum-Dum, or Corporal Dum-Dum, he was sergeant. They called him Dum-Dum, I guess, because he had broken down so many times from his ranks and so on. He was in charge. He was giving the orders. We come to this one intersection, said, all right, column left, oh, whatever. So we were all supposed to go left. So I had it arranged so 2 of the columns would go right and 2 left. And that's what happened. It was just massive. As you can see, a chaotic situation. I mean, the guy's all over, and the poor sergeant didn't know what to do about it. He's yelling, what happened? Who did that? This and that. So I don't know. I guess the word got back that I was one of the instigators. So a week later on the parade grounds, he had me out in front doing, what do you call it, detailed maneuvers alone. And in fact, at one time he got me out in front there. And he says, instead of calling me Private Starr, detail. Damn, said detail. I'm looking around. What are you doing? I said, I'm looking around for the details. He said, you're the detail. Wise guy, you know, etc. So anyway, but that was just a humorous little anecdote that we put in there. Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned seeing General Lemitzer.
Yeah, that was a good thing. You know, when we were up at the in the UNCMAC, United Nations Command Military Armistice Commission, is what it stood for. You would see. This is the first time I guess we had helicopters around for a few years, but these little bubble helicopters they used quite a bit, just a couple people to pilot them, one guy get in. And at our little pad right near our tents there, you'd hear a helicopter come in occasionally, and you knew it would be a pretty big shot probably, and different generals would come in, and I always remember General Lemnitzer, because he was at that time head of the whole Far East. He later became head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yeah. And I remember Herbert Hoover Jr. coming in there too, I guess look over the situation. So that was kind of fun to, you know, and then they let us, I mean, you just go walk over, and there were maybe a handful of us over there when General Lemnitzer landed, and that was a big deal. He'd come over and talk to you a little bit and ask you how conditions are and if you can get enough film up here and things like that. So that was kind of a treat, you know, felt like a big shot that, hey, boy, I met General Lemnitzer, like meeting, I don't know, the Pope in Washington or something like that, you know, that kind of thing, yeah. So okay. That was good.
Now, you were there for 2 years.
Yeah.
When did you go back home?
Well, then, you know, when time was up in July of '56, yeah, we flew, no, we took the plane, we took a ship back, stopped at Adak, Alaska, I remember that. hey, I got near Alaska. That was out in the Aleutians. But then I also remember on the ship, out in the middle of nowhere, some guy sighted a whale. It must have been that time of the year where the whales were coming. And every guy, I mean, and we must have had on those ships, they weren't like these huge balanced cruise ships today, but you know, you had a couple, I mean, hundreds and hundreds, probably 1,000 guys, all up to the left side of the ship, and the guys, all of a sudden, the guy from upstairs, please, some of you guys get over to the other side, it seems to be listening or someone, but it was just a frantic, hey, whales, whales, boom, and all that. So, anyway, we took the ship back, Mickey Mouse Patrick, I think it was called, General Patrick, and took it back to Seattle, and then went to Fort Lawton, it was called, and that's where we kind of mustered out and got flown home from there, yeah.
So, did you
And then
use
back to use the GI Bill.
I was just gonna ask, did you use the GI Bill?
Yeah, absolutely. I used the 2 years of it here, and then I went on to graduate school at Rutgers and used it until I exhausted it, you know, for my master's and the doctorate down, yeah. Yeah, and I was thinking, you know, Michael, on that went in for that. I mean, it was just that, but sometimes people talk, you know, today, or ever since Vietnam, you think a lot about patriotism one way or the other. And that was kind of like an issue that never even came up. It was just automatic that you went in. I mean, it wasn't that you were a great patriot, but you certainly weren't an unpatriot either. You went in, hey, that was what you were supposed to do, you know, and that kind of thing. So you just, I often thought about that hey, you went in the service and bitched about it like everybody else. But I often thought in retrospect, at least in peacetime, that guys who thought it was a waste, you know, that was their own fault. I mean, we had a guy there, geez, he was a down-home farmer from Pennsylvania, and he never left our little compound in the 2 years he was there. And I thought, oh, that's too bad. I mean, because, you know, you could get out and go down to Seoul or go to somewhere else or up to the DMZ or go to Japan. And obviously, in wartime, it'd be different, you know, and so on. So.
Did you stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you at all?
Yeah, well, one of my best friends who's now deceased, I mean, he was in Seoul, and I used to drive down and back to see him and vice versa, and ever since then, we were the best of friends. And then a couple of another one from Kenmore, who went in, lives in Atlanta, occasionally in touch with him, every year or so. And for the first few years out, and maybe it's almost like anything else, but I kept in touch with several of them, writing letters, maybe once a year for the first few years, and then that dwindled down to just a handful. One very close friend of mine, it was because we were alphabet together, Bob Sin from Michigan, lived up in Ann Arbor, and I went to his, I guess it must have been about his 65th birthday about 10, 15 years ago. First time I had seen him in many years, even though I had also stopped to see him once out of his house, and he died shortly thereafter. But I did keep in touch with him regularly. So to answer your question, a few of them, yes.
I think you've answered this a little bit, but how do you think your time in the service had an effect on your life?
Well, certainly it's good memories. I mean, it really is. I mean, it was a good experience. I mean, it was certainly for a guy coming out of probably an Irish, German Catholic background in schools and all that. Not all that, that's a funny expression. It was really a leveling experience, a good experience to meet all kinds of different types and get along with all kinds of different types, whether black, white, Jewish. Geez, we had a great mess sergeant, Murph Swigert from Sinking Spring, Pennsylvania. Jewish guy, made a career out of it. He was from special services, and he'd come over to our tent because he liked some of our guys, and we'd have a party there all the time, and he'd talk about all these strip joints and these saloons in Philadelphia, and he'd pretend he was the barker. We'd get guys from other tents, and we would have some great pictures of this in our tent, probably 15 guys in it. It was kind of an 8-man tent, 15, 20 guys just in there and drinking, you know, the inexpensive Army booze and listening to Murph Swigert go on and tell tales of these different cafes down in Pennsylvania and so on. So anyway, I'm branching out here. You're asking me about things. Those are fond memories. Fond memories. But I think just the idea of just being in the service, serving the country and so on, was a thing that influenced me for a long time. I mean, and even, you know, I don't want to say in a steady one, maybe more in the last 20 years than the first years out, because when I started to teach American history, way back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was kind of more of an emphasis on political and diplomatic, and people didn't pay much attention to the wars. You might remember some of this yourself, Mike, and that. But as time went on, I got more involved in World War II. I was talking to Nancy about this a little while ago, World War II, and beginning to teach it and becoming more enthralled with it and wanting to know more about it and interviewing people myself, just as you guys were back in the early 90s, and using some of their stories and, you know, just feeling better about it. Especially Private Ryan, because there was such a connection with Joe Nyland and the Nyland family of Western New York. I don't know how much you know about that, but that was really a close thing that when I'd use that in class at the end of it, what's his name, Spielberg? Who was he? Spielberg. You know, at the end, he introduced the Nyland family, and I've been very close to the Nyland family all my life, so there was an integral part of it. But then that's going off on a tangent again. But yeah, I mean, there's no question that it was, I think, just an important part of my life. I mean, just like when you think so much of your life, like the college, those are such formative years, your late teens and early 20s. I mean, I often think, what the hell was I doing in the 60s? You know, when I was married and raising kids, I don't think much about that. I think of my old cronies. I mean, I'm going out with a couple of them for lunch tomorrow, you know, and I meet these guys, and that's what old guys do, don't they? They go out to lunch and breakfast all the time and talk and rehash stuff and so on, yeah. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the interview.
Okay, well, thanks for all your
Very good
time,
interview.
Wayne and Mike, yeah.